We all know about the Wright brothers as the aviation pioneers in the end of 1903. They invented the world's first successful motor-operated airplane. What would you say if we tell you that 8 years before the Wright brothers, around 3,000 people including the British witnessed an unmanned aircraft at Bombay Chowpatty? We talk about Vaimānika Shastra or the science of aeronautics in this video. Rishi Bharadwaj, one of the Saptarishis, deals with the science of aeronautics, explaining the construction, diagrams and section views of several types of airplanes. He does this in work called Yantra Sarvasva in 8 chapters, 100 subject heads comprising of 500 sutras and 3000 shloks. Vimans have been mentioned in the Rigveda, Yajurveda, Ramayana and Mahabharata. It's said that before World War I, Pandit Subbarya Sastri dictated some unknown texts of Sanskrit and credited Rishi Bharadwaj for it. In 1928, he wrote a letter to the Maharaja of Darbhanga, requesting aid to publish these manuscripts. But this fell on deaf ears. Subbarya Sastri, completely heartbroken, soon passed away. It was around 20 years later, his adopted son released these manuscripts. In 1951, Mr. G. R. Josia, Director of International Academy of Sanskrit Research, translated the handwritten Sanskrit manuscripts of Pandit Subbarya Sastri to English. If these scripts came into limelight only in 1951, then how did someone at Bombay Chowpatty fly an unmanned airplane 8 years before the Wright brothers? In September 1952, an article published in an issue of Vande Mataram, Gujarati Daily, mentioned an experimental airplane by a man called Shivkar Bapuji Talpade. A similar article appeared in a Pune newspaper under the caption "First Inventor of Airplanes." Shivkar Talpade, born in 1864, a Sanskrit scholar living in Bombay, was fascinated by the aeronautical science of Vaimānika Shastra. He flew his first unmanned flight and named it as Marutsakhā, which means the friend of the winds. Marutsakhā flew to a height of 1,500 feet before crashing down, whereas the aircraft designed by the Wright brothers flew only to a height of 120 feet. A news article was published in Kesari, a popular newspaper by Lokmanya Tilak, covering the entire event. Some major celebrated people like Mahadev Govind Ranade and Sayajirao Gaikwad, the Maharaja of Baroda, witnessed this live event. The British were highly disappointed by Talpade's efforts and hence ordered the Maharaja of Baroda not to help Talpade financially to build more such aircrafts. Failing to do so, the British would snatch the kingdom of Maharaja of Baroda. Unfortunately, due to the death of his wife and limited resources, he couldn't continue the research and he soon died thereafter. In April 2017, an aerospace engineer, Mr. Travis Taylor, conducted an experiment in University of California at Irvine, based on the designs mentioned in Vaimānika Shastra. This experiment showed that not only the aircraft was steady under heavy winds, but the design would positively work and the machine could fly. Are we so unfortunate that we Indians still can't recognize and celebrate Shivkar Bapuji Talpade and his invention?
This is an article from the Hindustan Times School section. The article is from September 9th, 2022 by the HT School Web Desk. Shivkar Talpade, the untold story of the man who flew India's first aircraft. Shivkar Talpade was the first man to fly a plane in India over Chowpatty in 1895, 8 years before the Wright brothers. Picture shown is a possible sketch of the plane that Shivkar Talpade had envisioned. As a child, you may have wished to fly like a bird. So did our ancestors centuries ago. So our ancestors made feathers or light wood wings connected to their arms to see if they could fly. It took patience, tenacity, passion, and creative brains to enable humanity to finally take to the skies. Wilbur and Orville Wright, famously known as the Wright Brothers, are recognized as the first people to fly an aircraft. However, Shivkar Bapuji Talpade from India remained unrecognized. His legacy has been depicted in a film, Avazada, released in January 2015, directed by Vibhu Puri, starring Oshman Khurrana and Mithu Chakraborty. Let's discover the untold story of Talpade, the Indian who invented airplane before the Wright brothers. In 1864, a boy with extraordinary vision was born in the Patari Prabhu family of South Bombay. His name was Shivkar Bapuji Talpade. With his roots in the Arya Samaj, Talpade had immense knowledge of Sanskrit. A scholar of the Vedas and Sanskrit, he was fascinated by books on Indian aeronautics. Since his childhood, Talpade dreamt of flying and exploring space. Driven by his passion, he began to look for mentions on flying in the Vedas. Meanwhile, Talpade met Pandit Sabaraya Shastri, the author of Vaimanika Shastra. Shastri learned the art of plane making from an ascetic in Kolar, Karnataka. He requested a trainee engineer, T.K. Elappa, to make drawings for it. He also hired a local priest, G.V. Sharma, to write instructions in the manuscript. Shastri gave Talpade scriptures for making an aircraft. He claimed that they were the teachings of Bharadwaja, an ancient sage. However, this assertion is merely based on textual reference and has not yet been verified. Birth of the first Indian aircraft. Talpade built his flight in 1895 named Marutsakhā with Shastri's instruction. Marutsakhā is a poromona of two words, Marut, which means a stream of air, and Sakha, which means friend. Talpade named his aircraft after the goddess of knowledge, Sarawati, mentioned in the Rig Veda. Unnamed and heavier than air, Marutsakhā flew 1,500 feet above Bombay's Chowpatty. It reached a modest height before colliding with the ground. The aircraft was a bamboo cylinder fueled by a mercury ion engine. It remained in the air for 18 minutes before the Naxarasa accumulators ran out of power. The then Maharaja of Baroda, H. Sayaji Rao Gakwat, and eminent Indian judge Mahadeva Govind Pranadi are said to have witnessed this flight, according to P.T. S.D. Satwalika, a pupil of Talpade's. Marutsakhā could sustain flight for a short period. An editorial was also published on this aircraft in Marathi newspaper Kasari by Bal Gandhar Tilak, a prominent freedom fighter. Two more English newspapers published terse accounts of it. On the day Marutsakhā flight took place, Talpade's techno-savvy wife, SMT Lakshmi Bai, was by his side. Lakshmi Bai was a Vedic scholar and had immense knowledge on architecture. A story that never left Indian shores. Whether Shivkar Talpade was the first man to make and fly aircraft continues to be debated. However, many pieces of literature claim that the Marutsakhā was the first cylindrical bamboo plane fueled by liquid mercury. Hydrogen was released from the mercury when it interacted with sunlight. Also, since hydrogen is lighter than air, the plane flew. However, the aircraft didn't ascend very high or linger too long in the air. But Talpade was successful in building and flying an unmanned aircraft centuries before the Wright brothers. Apparently, due to censorship by the British Raj, the success story never left Indian shores. Till date, no written evidence of either the drawings, the flying, or anything connected to it are available to confirm these events. This is an article from wikipedia.org about Shivkar Talpade. Shivkar Bapuji Talpade was an Indian instructor with an interest in Sanskrit and aviation. He lived in Mumbai and is claimed to have constructed and flown an unmanned heavier-than-air aircraft in 1895. Contemporary accounts of a successful flight do not exist, and no reliable historical records document its existence. Pseudo-historical narratives about Talpade proliferated in India in the early 2000s among adherents of the Hindu nationalist right wing. These included the false claim that Talpade had invented the modern aircraft. Talpade's aircraft. Talpade is claimed to have constructed an unmanned heavier-than-air aircraft named Marutsakhā, Friend of the Air, and flown it above Bombay's Chowpatty beach in 1895. Contemporary accounts of a successful flight do not exist, and no reliable historical records document its existence. Talpade's aircraft was reputed to have flown to a height of 1,500 feet, that's 460 meters. Pratap Velkar, a local architect who has researched Talpade's life and written a book about him, denies this, stating that it rose to a small height before crashing. The aircraft has been described as a cylinder of bamboo, with claims it used mercury or urine as fuel. Some of Talpade's drawings were said to have been sent to Hindustan Aeronautics (HAL), but Anuradha Reddy, a historian of aviation, was unable to trace them. The aircraft itself has been described as being sold to Wright Brothers or to HAL. Some accounts of the event stated that the flight was watched by Sayajirao Gaikwad III, then the Maharaja of Baroda, but direct evidence for this is scant. Velkar states that no royals attended, and as it was not well publicized. Some versions of the story say that Talpade had advised from Subbaraya Shastri, 1866 to 1940, who later wrote Vaimanika Shastra, Science of Aeronautics, a text that is frequently associated with descriptions of aircraft in the Vedas. Shastri claimed the text was delivered to him physically and was thousands of years old. A 1974 paper by scientists from the Indian Institute of Science declared that the designs in Vaimanika Shastra itself were technologically unfeasible, stating that the text showed a complete lack of understanding of the dynamics of the flight of heavier-than-air craft. The study also stated that elements of the text were entirely modern and that it was definitely not Vedic in origin. Shastri himself in his autobiography states that Talpade attempted to construct models of aircraft under Shastri's guidance, but was unsuccessful in making any of them fly. Cultural legacy. Narratives about the event proliferated in the early 2000s among the adherents of the nationalist right wing. The absence of evidence of its construction is attributed to censorship by the British Raj. Talpade developed a reputation as the first man to fly an aircraft. Given that this achievement was supposed to have taken place 8 years before the Wright brothers flew their plane in 1903, the aircraft attributed to Talpade was unmanned. Unmanned aircraft were already in existence at that time and were flown successfully decades before Talpade's birth. The first such flight was by English engineer John Stringfellow, whose craft flew about 30 yards in 1848. A film based on life of Talpade, Haibazada, starring Ayushmann Khurrana, was released on 30th January 2015. The government of Uttar Pradesh exempted the film from taxes in that state. The film states that Talpade had accomplished in 1895 what the Wright brothers did in 1903. The Hindi news channel Z News aired a piece titled Wright Brothers Wrong The Wright brothers were wrong. The segment claimed that Talpade's craft was the first modern aircraft in the world and that it was the first drone. Also in 2015, a controversial paper presented at the Indian Science Congress claimed that Talpade had invented the modern aircraft. Ram Prasad Gandhiraman, a scientist working for NASA, described the paper as pseudoscience.
A Vedic flying machine, myth or historic reality. Posted by Chandrasekhara, July 20th, 2015. What is science? The word has originated from the Latin word scientia, meaning knowledge. Wikipedia defines it as a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about nature and the universe. In an older and closely related meaning, Science also refers to a body of knowledge itself, of the type that can be rationally explained and reliably applied. The keywords here are testable explanations and predictions about nature and the universe. This means that any theory can be considered as scientific if it is testable. It is quite possible that we may not have means of testing a particular theory with us at present, but the theory still remains scientific because sometime in future, when test apparatus is available, the theory would be testable. Theory pertaining to Higgs particle, proposed by Prof. Higgs in 1960s, can be considered as one of the best example. His theory could be tested only in 2013, 53 years after it was proposed. In medieval period, the border between scientific thought and philosophy was often blurred. In fact, until the 17th century, natural philosophy was considered a separate branch of philosophy in the West. In this period, there was not much difference between a philosophist or a scientist. Later or during the early modern period, the words science and philosophy of nature were sometimes used interchangeably. Readers may not believe, but my grandfather, who did his master's in physics at the beginning of 20th century, was awarded a degree of Master of Arts with Science. Last weekend, a national annual get-together of top scientists from India was held in Mumbai. The yearly gathering is called as Indian Science Congress, and as is the practice, was inaugurated by the Prime Minister of India even this year. With the kind of importance and publicity given to the meeting, anyone would have expected the deliberations at various sessions of the Congress to be of cutting-edge areas and, above all, based on pure scientific thought. A controversial paper was presented at the meeting by Captain Anand Bodas and Ameya Jadhav about ancient aviation in India. The paper, quoting a Vedic Rishi Maharshi Bharadwaja, says, ancient aviation in India, as described by great sage or Maharshi Bharadwaja, was more advanced than modern-day technology. The knowledge of aeronautics is described in Sanskrit in 100 sections, 8 chapters, 500 principles, and 3,000 verses. In the modern day, only 100 principles are available. 7,000 years ago, aeroplanes, which travel from one country to another, one continent to another, and one planet to another. Great Sage also mentions 97 reference books for aviation. From all descriptions appearing in various Sanskrit literature, I have no doubt in my mind that Maharshi Bharadwaja was an exceptionally brilliant and accomplished scholar of highest ranking. He appears to have had great thirst for pure knowledge and a scientific mind. There is no need to question purity of his thought. Still, I feel that the best way in which he can be described would be call him as a natural philosophist of ancient times rather than a scientist. Let us now turn to historic past. There is only one recorded instance when someone in India tried to build a flying machine in India based on Vedic mantras. Shivkar Bapuji Talpade from Mumbai actually made a flying machine and flew it in 1895. One of Talpade's students, P. Satwalkar, has chronicled that his craft called Marutsakhā flew unmanned for a few minutes and came down. No one knows how he powered his plane, but it is believed that he used the principle of solar energy combined with mercury to do that job, which according to some experts is similar to a mercury vortex ion thruster propulsion developed in 1970s. An ion propulsion system converts power from any source such as solar in this case into the kinetic energy of an ionized gas jet. That jet, as it exits the craft, propels it in the opposite direction. Dr. Harold Kaufman, now retired from NASA, designed and built the first broad-beam electron bombardment ion engine in 1959 using mercury as fuel. This fact certainly gives credibility to Talpade's flying machine, though doubts remain whether it was an aircraft in conventional sense or a rocket-like craft. Wikipedia says, and I quote, according to K.R.N. Swamy, a curious scholarly audience headed by a famous Indian judge and a nationalist, Mahadeva Govinda Ranade and H.H. Sayaji Rao Gaikwad, respectively, had the good fortune to see the unmanned end aircraft named as Marutsakhā take off, fly to a height of 1,500 feet, and then fall down to earth. The presence of Mahadev Govind Ranade and Sayaji Rao Gaikwad III during the flight is also cited in Annals of the Bandaka Oriental Research Institute. A former Indian defense officer stated in 2004 that Marutsakhā failed to operate to its full design limits due to technical reasons. After the experiment, Marutsakhā apparently was stored at Talpade's house until well after his death. Velakara quotes one of Talpade's nieces, Roshan Talpade, as saying the family used to sit in the aircraft's frame and imagine they were flying. A model reconstruction of Marutsakhā was exhibited at an exhibition on aviation at Velpal, and Hindustan Aeronautics Limited has preserved documents relating to the experiment. Except for Talpade's experiment, we have no other instance known of any other flying machine built on Vedic principles in India. Presentation of this scientific paper at Indian Science Congress about great sages' theories on aeronautics therefore appears to me a tall order indeed, when no specific details of any kind are available of any of the flying machines enumerated by the sage in his works. This paper should have been presented rather at some conference on Oriental studies, where it would have been in proper order of things. There is a valid reason for my saying this. A research paper titled as A Critical Study of the Work Vaimanika Shastra, authored by H.S. Mukunda, S.M. Deshpande and others from Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru, was published in 1974. The book Vaimanika Shastra, or Science of Aeronautics, along with another book titled as Brihad Vimana Shastra by Sri Brahmuni Parivrajaka, according to authors of this paper, contain verses in Sanskrit describing aircraft with their Hindi translations. These books contain verses which, according to their texts, are supposed to form only part of Yantra Sarvasvasva by Sage Bharadwaja, which is devoted to a summary of the work on Vimana Vigyana by a number of other sages and is said to be for the benefit of all mankind. After a detailed and critical analysis of the books and the flying machines described therein, the authors of this research paper conclude, any reader by now would have concluded the obvious that the planes described above are at the best poor concoctions rather than expressions of something real. None of the planes has properties or capabilities of being flown. The geometrics are unimaginably horrendous from the point of view of flying, and the principles of propulsion make them resist rather than assist flying. I had the privilege of knowing one of the authors of this paper, Dr. S. M. Deshpande, rather closely, when he was studying for his master's degree at the Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru, many decades ago. He is now considered as an authority in aeronautical engineering in India, and I have no hesitation in believing what he has concluded in above report. However, the point I am trying to make here is not about whether ancient Indians from Vedic periods had the capabilities to make flying machines or not. It is better to leave that to experts. My contention here is whether Indian Science Congress is the right platform for such kind of claims, for which no experimental verification to prove them conclusively is possible today, or any time in future for lack of sufficient and enough knowledge about them. Another small observation. The paper read at Science Congress says that 7,000 years ago, ancient people made aeroplanes which traveled from one country to another, one continent to another, and one planet to another. 7,000 years ago works out to 5,000 BCE, the period when even Indus-Saraswati culture had not developed, leave alone Vedic culture, which developed much later around 1200 BCE. At this period of time, inhabitants in Indian subcontinent had just come out of hunter-gatherer stage and were setting up small habitats like at Mirgarh, currently in Balochistan, Pakistan. Presentation of this or such papers at Indian Science Congress appears to me as odd and even embarrassing for the Indian scientific community in general. I can only hope that the organizers would be more careful in future. January 7, 2014.